What's up, my healthy friends? Here we are back on the How to Not Get Sick and Die podcast, ready to dive into a juicy conversation that hopefully is going to help you take a perspective on emotional and binge eating that might be new or fresh and just the thing that you need to hear right now, especially if your goals are on the same page as mine. Because in 2023, it's my mission to coach 500 people to stop the binge eating and savage self talk cycle so they can lose weight whilst feeling in control and without restriction along the way. And today's amazing guest spends his professional time in this exact space as well. I want you to meet Glenn Livingston. This fine man is a veteran psychologist with a PhD that works in the binge eating space and formerly was the longtime CEO of a multi-million dollar marketing consultancy firm, which has serviced several Fortune 500 clients, specifically in the food industry. After going on his own health journey with food and seeing what the sugar industry did to the world and with the rising obesity rates, he turned his attention away from marketing and across to binge eating. And in the process, he became disillusioned by what traditional psychology had to offer overweight and or food obsessed or sugar addicted individuals. Glenn then spent several decades researching the nature of binging and overeating via work with his own patients and a self funded research program with more than 40,000 participants. He's actually also been here with us before on episode 96, back in the days of double digit episodes. And I really do recommend you go and give your index finger a workout to scroll through all the amazing episodes we have to check out episode 96 once you've finished with this one right here. Anyhow, Glenn, my friend, welcome back to the show. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here again. It's nice to see you.
It's nice to see you too. And I'm glad that we're not in a lockdown pandemic like we were last time we caught up.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, it was a couple of years ago, wasn't it?
It was. Time flies, right?
Yeah.
So I'm really
I
curious.
still have some hair and teeth, but I'm getting older.
Now, you look fantastic.
Thanks. I'll be 60 this year.
Wow, really? I
Yeah.
honestly would not have guessed that.
I wouldn't have guessed it either.
Is that because you stopped counting?
Kind of. No, I've always looked forward to being older. My dad told me he wouldn't really pay attention to what I had to say until I was 40.
Right.
So as a result, I always wanted to be a year older, and turned out he didn't pay attention to what I had to say after that either.
Damn it.
Yeah, what are you gonna do?
Right, parents, hey. So I have a really interesting question. Well, it's interesting to me, so hopefully it'll be interesting to the listeners. But since we've caught up last, it's been 2 or 3 years, and being in the startup phase of running my own podcast and business in the health and wellness space, but really the space is irrelevant. What I've learned in this sort of personal brand self-marketing world is that I've spent a significant amount of my time on marketing, on figuring out how to communicate this stuff to the world in a way that leads them to action, right? And so I feel like at this point, I've almost forgotten my actual profession and qualifications and that I'm just an average marketer. And so I'm really curious because often in these marketing conversations with marketing, consultants and coaches and that type of thing, the conversation is about psychology. It's about behavior change and about getting people to change and make a decision and motivate them to act. And so I'm curious how being a psychologist allowed you to be such a successful marketer. What's the link there?
It's a very interesting question. No one's ever asked me that before. Originally, I'm a clinical psychologist by training, so I never wanted to go into marketing per se. I just I used to have my little friends come over and lie down on the couch and tell me about their mother when I was a kid. And that's all I ever really wanted to do, just tell people. But I married a marketer. And so I had studied type of behavioral modeling, which allowed us to predict what people were thinking and what they would do without having to ask them questions. And I wound up consulting for large companies based upon that knowledge. Um, my father hated marketing. Talked about my dad before. And I would say, Dad, I don't really understand that because you actually are a marketer. You can't be a psychologist without being a marketing because ethical marketing is convincing people in words to do what's in their best interest. And psychotherapy is convincing people in words to do what's in their best interest. So if you look at it like that, it's really the same. What he didn't like was the unethical marketing.
Yeah.
I think that I was on the wrong side of the war 30 years ago. I think that I was helping big companies to sell sugar to kids and do things that I really shouldn't have been doing. But there is this overlap where people think that they need to be a smart shopper. They like to think of themselves as making rational decisions, and people don't really make rational decisions. They buy for emotional reasons and then they justify it with logic. And so there were these psychological techniques that I could use to get at that, to figure out what they were thinking without having to ask them what they were thinking. Very powerful. Like I said, I feel a little bit like the Marlboro Man at the end of his life. I feel kind of contrite, like I shouldn't have done that. And I've been trying to make up for it these last 10 years or so by, helping to unaddict people from all these bags and boxes and containers that hyper palatable concentrations of starch and sugar and fat and oil and cytotoxins that they target the bliss point in the reptilian brain without giving you enough nutrition to feel satisfied. Um, so yeah, so that there's a great overlap in knowing how to talk to people, figure out what they really want. It's just that now I use that for good, and before I was in the dark side of the force. So,
Well, I just want to
so
acknowledge you because I think it takes courage to look back on former decisions and possibly judge them as the wrong decision or the wrong being on the wrong side of the war, as you phrased it. So it takes courage to,
youth is wasted on the young.
isn't it?
Yeah, we all make decisions in our youth that we wish we would have done differently. So
Yeah, totally.
yeah,
But
but
yeah,
I think I'm doing a lot of good now. I think I'm doing a lot of good.
well, and that's what I was going to say next is the fact that you one acknowledge that and have changed your feelings about it, but two are now actively doing something to maybe fix the mistakes of the past, or however you want to phrase it, do good in a time where you might not have done good previously or had different motivations. So I think we love you either way. We appreciate the
Thank you,
work you do either
thank you,
way.
thank you very much.
No, that's
Yeah.
totally fine. I guess my curiosity is just getting the better of me here, which is, you mentioned doing some of that marketing to people and the unethical marketing. What type of marketing are sugar companies doing that you would consider unethical?
Well, I don't know if you could technically say that it's unethical, but I wasn't really happy about the product.
Hmm.
I look at the epidemic of diabetes and cardiovascular disease and kidney disease and all these diet reversible or diet preventable conditions. And so much of it was caused by, sugar, by was concentrated sugar and salt and all the other nasty chemicals I mentioned. And I, the people who are doing it are not really evil because that's what the consumer really wanted. Unfortunately, it was easier to sell that, but I don't feel good about my life being about having kids eat more sugar. I just don't think that was the right thing to do. Some things border on unethical, like when you are when you're packaging things in a way to signal to the evolutionary brain that there's a diversity of micronutrients available because of the diversity of colors. But what's really happening is you've hardly put any of those micronutrients into the food that you have. You're just making it look like it is. And our brains respond to that. I'm not quite sure that that's ethical. So, I I don't consider myself to be the ultimate judge of what's ethical or not, and should the consumers be able to buy what they really want, or should there be some regulating body that's being a good parent and tell them that you can't have your pudding until you've fed your salad. I don't know. I don't know, but I'm happier about what I'm doing now. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, totally. I
Yeah.
read something recently which pointed something out which may have been there all along when it came to marketing to children with cereals. And it said if you walk down the cereal aisle, you'll notice that all of the characters that have been created around these cereals are obviously, sort of these cartoon characters that get have sort of children's buy-in to like the character and the identity and what it means to do what that character does. But also, if you walk down the aisle, you'll notice that all of the eyes of those characters on the boxes are looking down, so that when the children look up at the shelf, they're being looked at. They don't. The eyes don't
Oh,
look at the
yeah,
parents.
yeah, yeah. That's scary.
It's so
It's scary.
scary. It's so
Yeah.
scary. So, and as you
No,
start, so
I mean, and I think some of these things have chemicals in the packaging or the food itself, food like substance itself, that will turn off your ability to know when you're full.
Mhm.
Some of the like bags of chips and things are made on a multitude of assembly lines, so there's a slight variation in flavor.
Yeah.
Because when you're in nature, if you find a slight variation in flavor, you're probably finding a diversity of nutrients, and so you just kind of keep going. So um, yeah, there are things like that that I think are on the borderline of being not sure that's going to get you into heaven or not, so
Yeah.
my job is to help people to get themselves unaddicted and manage their cravings
Mhm.
for those types of things if they're overdoing it. That's my job, to
Yeah.
whatever extent they want to do it. And a lot of people include those in their diets. A lot of people don't. There's a way to recover one way or the other if they want to. So that's what I do now.
Just the way you framed that may brought up the question for me about abstainers versus moderators. Do you believe that that there's one or the other and there's very few moderators, or do you believe you can become a moderator? You can successfully
My,
moderate your
my,
relationship with sugar.
so I've worked with over 2,000 clients with all the coaches that work with me in groups. And so I have very strong opinion about that. I see like about 2 out of 3 people are able to moderate, and the third one has to abstain. But it varies from person to person, and it also varies from substance to substance. So some people, like I can't eat chocolate at all, period, end of story. I tried 6 ways to Sunday, and I started eating chocolate, and I want to throw your mother aside and go for the chocolate cake. That's me. But most other things, if I want to have a little, I can plan it out and put very specific conditions under it. You can easily do that with flour. I can do it with salt. Can't do it with chocolate.
Mhm.
So some people are moderating flour, but they are not moderating cheese. Some people are moderating cheese, but they're not moderating sugar. Some people have to abstain from all of it. It's it my there are 2 ways to figure that out. I have people write 2 separate hypothetical targets for themselves. One target would be like I will never have chocolate on a weekday again. Another one will be I'll never have chocolate again. I have to become a person who doesn't eat chocolate. And then if you project yourself out for a year having tried both of those scenarios and you see yourself walking through a day, what do you see? What's different about each of those situations? What's not just your weight, but your energy level and your presence of mind and your relationships and your productivity and your experience at work and all of that. If they're not very different, then probably your intuition says you could moderate. Usually that intuition tends to be right. Um, but if you try 4 separate rules, if you say, well, okay, let's try never having chocolate during the week. Well, that didn't work. Okay, I'm only going to have chocolate after I've worked out for an hour and a half. Okay, well, that didn't work. Well, I'm only going to have chocolate on my sister's cousin's parakeet's birthday. Um, when you tried 4 or 5 different rules and it doesn't work, then that probably means you need to abstain.
Mhm.
That's my experience.
Yeah, I'm
So,
curious with the abstinence idea. I find in the experience that I've had personally as well, but also working with the type of clients that I work with, is that, and it probably sort of filters into that whole fad extreme diet change, is that when you project out, I'm going to change something forever or for a significant period of time, that overwhelm of I'm not going to have this experience for months, years, or ever is so overwhelming that the idea is abandoned. And then and for some people, it needs to be a day by day approach or a meal by meal approach. Like, I'm not going to have it today. And we'll start that conversation again tomorrow. Do you have a similar experience? And I guess second to that, how do you help people navigate that overwhelm of such a long period of time without?
Yeah. So if you ask people, this is going to be a long answer, but
That's
it's worth
okay.
it, I promise.
That's why
Okay.
we've got a podcast.
Um, if you ask people, could you give up chocolate forever? They'll go, I couldn't do that. If you ask them, you think you could become the kind of person who doesn't eat chocolate? I think, well, maybe I could. Because character trumps willpower. We character is what you habitually do at the moment of temptation. And we have unwritten rules in our character that we abide in all the time because of the kind of people that we are. Like you don't push old ladies down in traffic, and you don't take food from other people's tables at the restaurant, and there are a lot of things that you just don't do. You just never articulated that you don't do it because of the person that you are. So that's the first thing, is that when you think of yourself as building character rather than following these Nazi police rules in your head, then it becomes much easier. Secondly, the only time you can ever eat healthy is the present, because the present is the only time that you ever have. So when you hear this little voice in your head that says you can't give up chocolate, you're going to be tortured forever, eventually you're going to give in. You say, well, what's this eventually stuff? They're talking about some time in the future. Right now, I choose to avoid chocolate and have my big salad or my kale green smoothie or whatever it's going to be. So you keep bringing it back to the present. You flex your binge-free now muscle. And the more you flex your binge-free now muscle, the stronger that binge-free now muscle becomes. So that in the future, it actually gets easier, not harder, as your inner voice, that inner destructive voice would represent. The third thing is you bifurcate your mind. It's kind of like the angel and the devil on the shoulder. You figure out how to describe the bullseye of an archery target with precision. Because if you don't have a very clear bullseye, you don't know what you're aiming for, you're going to hit something else. And if you miss it, you're not going to know by how much and in what direction and how to make adjustments. So I will say something like, I'll never have chocolate on a weekday again, so that I have a very clear bullseye to shoot at. But now I will bifurcate my mind, and I will say that any thoughts that suggest that I'm going to have chocolate on a weekday, those are going to be my pig. You don't have to call it your pig. I happen to call it my pig. Sometimes I wish I didn't. I wasn't going to teach this stuff. Did I mention I used to be big? I used to be like almost 300 pounds. I had a real eating problem myself. I'm not just a doctor that works with people. Anyway, I used to call that inner voice that would suggest that I break my rules. I would say, that's not me, that's my pig. My pig is squealing for pig slop. If it would say, go ahead and break your rule now, you can start your silly diet again tomorrow. I'd say that's my pig. Okay. With a bifurcated mind like that, and it's just a game that you play in your head,
Mm-hmm.
you can consciously and purposely lie to yourself in a way, get around this forever problem. We both know that it would be silly to stamp a rule in stone forever and obstinately insist on sticking to that no matter what happened. I remember I used to have a rule that said, I will never eat dried fruit without some nuts and seeds, because the nuts and seeds were thought to slow it down. Then there's this research data that came out a couple of years later that said that the nuts and seeds actually made the glycemic load higher. I would have been silly if I wouldn't change my food plan at that point.
Yeah.
So what you do is you present your food plan as if it were set in stone to this thing inside you that wants to break the rules. It's kind of like when my niece was 2 years old, I said to her, you can't ever cross the street without holding my hand. You're never, ever going to be able to do that. I don't want you to even think about going in the street, because she wasn't mature enough to have those images in her head. It was too dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
I lied to her, because I knew that in 5 or 6 years, or maybe before, her mother was going to teach her how to cross the street without holding someone's hand, all by herself. And she's a grown kid at a fancy university now. She's pretty cool. But I lied to her because it was the only way to manage it. It's the same thing with your inner pig. That inner reptile comes from the reptilian brain. It's all your survival impulses, the feast or famine, fight or flight, flee or mate.
Hmm.
And it acts like a 2-year-old with food. And so if you tell it, well, we're going to do this for a little while, but we'll probably change our mind later on, it's going to go, can we change it now? How about now? How about now? Now, how about now? Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's do it. Right. And you'll have no peace. It's like a kid throwing a temper tantrum in a toy store because you occasionally get it. It knows that if it throws a temper tantrum long enough, that you're going to give in. So you lie to yourself and you tell it that it's set in stone. But you know that with forethought and consideration, um, reviewing your experience and not and accumulating knowledge and um, things that you want to accomplish, you can change your goals anytime you want to. This is a free country, and you're a free human being with a free mind. And that's part of what being an adult is being able to change the target that you're aiming for. But what I suggest is that you pick a target and you aim for it and you commit with it. You commit to it with perfection as you present it to the pig. It's the same way that an Olympic archer aims at that target. They actually see the arrow going into the target. They can feel it in their soul before they let go of the arrow.
Hmm.
Right? If they miss the arrow, they're kind to themselves. They don't say, "Oh, I'm a pathetic archer. I'm never going to get this right. I should shoot all the rest of the arrows in the air." They assess by how much and in what direction they missed and they make adjustments. And then they commit with perfection again. I call it committing with perfection and forgiving yourself with dignity. When you do this, you are giving yourself permission to purge your mind of doubt and insecurity and really just become one with that target so that your energy is not drained and your focus is not drained by all that doubt and insecurity. The perfect commitment allows you to do that. The last thing I will say about people's fear about this
Hmm.
is that they're frightened of the feelings of rebelliousness. They'll say, I can't make a hard and fast rule because that will make me feel too rebellious and I will have to binge because of that.
You read my
And
mind. I was going to ask that next about the rebellion.
yeah, and Janine Roth will even say that any restriction is followed by an equal and opposite binge, even a mental restriction. I think that goes a little too far. I think it is true with overly restricting food. I think we need to regularly flood our body with nutrition on a regular basis if you want to lose weight and feel confident about overcoming your cravings. Um, so people will say that you will feel too rebellious. And I'll say, well, that's true. You will feel rebellious. The moment you draw a line, there's going to be a part of you that wants to break it. No question about it. Why reify that feeling? Why reify any feeling? Why reify the feeling of depression or anger or anxiety or joy? It's like saying, well, I'm afraid I'm going to get too happy and I'm going to celebrate with food. I'm afraid I'm going to get too angry and I'm going to have to celebrate with food. No, what you want to do is make food decisions with your head. You want to sever the link between that emotional excitement, whatever type of emotional excitement it be, whether it be rebelliousness, anxiety, any emotional excitement. You want to sever the link between that and overeating the same way that you would sever the link between a fire and burning down the house and your fireplace. You'd have a good fireplace that contains it. So that's the kind of work that we do. And I say, yes, I'm going to be rebellious, but I don't make my important food decisions based upon how I'm feeling. I make my important food decisions based upon what I intellectually know and have researched to be better for me. 99% of
Yeah. Well,
the time.
as you described that, I remember what you said in the beginning about the consumer behavior, which is that we purchase on emotion and justify with logic. And so
Yeah.
then going with that idea of, 99% of the time using this logical framework and self-management tool, I think about the mum with 3 kids that hasn't slept properly for 4 years, that's also got a full-time job. And so, and men as well, like anyone that's in a situation that's not a perfect life and they're just, totally depleted, their nervous system's down, they're maybe a little bit sick, all of those things. And then trying to come in with logic at their sort of, your most intellectually challenged time, and you're overrun by emotion and reactionary things. Like, how do we get the muscle big enough to be able to survive even in that situation?
This is what my new book is about as compared to the old book. I recovered from my own food addiction cognitively. I would identify the things the pig would say, like, just start your silly diet again tomorrow. It will be just as easy. And I would remove that justification by proving it wrong. Like the way the brain works, if you have a craving and you have a thought, and then you reinforce that thought and that craving by eating the junk, you're going to be more likely to have that craving even stronger tomorrow. You're going to be more likely to think, just start tomorrow. So that's what I would call a cognitive refutation, fixing your thinking about food. The impact of that is it makes it less comfortable to cross the line. That doesn't mean that you can't cross it. It's kind of like if you used to have a greased chute that you could slide down, now you poured some sandpaper and glass on it. You can still go down, but it's not going to be very pleasant. Okay. It took me a long time to recover. And for the first 5 or 6, so it took me many years journaling to get all of those thoughts fixed myself. Over the first 5 years or so that the book was published and we were coaching all these people, I worked very, very hard to be able to fix people's thinking quicker. But I would find, and so, we got to the point that we had a 90% reduction in overeating over the first month, and it would hold at like 60 or 70% if you looked at it 6 months or a year, mostly split into the people who kept using the technique, who were doing really well, and the people who stopped who weren't. So I thought we were doing pretty darn good with the technique like that. But there was this nagging problem, which I call the screw it, just do it response, where it's just exactly what you're saying. People would experience some type of what psychologists call organismic distress. Like, I'm just not okay. There are too many kids that are yelling for my attention. There are too many decisions that I have to make. I didn't get enough sleep. I didn't drink enough water. I haven't been outside. I haven't been able to get out of the rat race all day long. And there isn't really enough authentic pleasure in my life. And I found that over time, when I addressed those things, the first thing we would address were people's nutrition, which is difficult for me because I'm not a medical doctor or a dietitian, but I could see right in front of my eyes that people who were not eating regular, reliable meals, people that were trying to lose weight really quickly, people that were on very extreme diets, I'm only going to have protein shakes, or I'm only going to eat meat and leafy vegetables, or I'm only going to eat fruit. People that were on the very extreme diets had a much harder time maintaining them than the people who were eating regularly, reliably. People who had more processed foods were having a harder time with the screw it, just do it response than people who gravitating towards more whole natural foods, whether that be plant-based or animal-based. But if they got the junk out of the system, they were doing better, because a lot of that junk creates inflammation that creates organismic distress that makes you feel like there's something wrong. And so I started looking at a lot of different techniques for intervening in. It's really called sympathetic nervous system activity. When your emergency system is revved up and saying, there's something wrong here. We need resources. You can't be so discriminating about food. It's all well and good that you've spent all this time rationally thinking through what you're going to eat, but screw that, because we need more resources. Nom 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 nom, go dislodge your jaw and feed the delicatessen into it. But I mean, that's kind of what people feel like. It's almost like there's a trigger that goes off. That's your sympathetic nervous system pushing the higher level brain, the rational brain, out of the way so that you get enough resources for what it perceives is necessary for your survival. In the modern food environment, you can't really trust your instincts like that. It goes towards the wrong things. So we help when in retrospect, I recognize that these cognitive lines that I would draw, like I will never have chocolate on a weekday again, they made it really easy to wake up when the sympathetic nervous system was getting too active, because you would hear a little voice that said, well, here's why you should have chocolate on a weekday. So I said, oh, okay, there's something wrong. And at the time, I just conceived of it as, well, that's my pig talking, not me. But really, what was happening was that my sympathetic nervous system was trying to force me to be less discriminating with food because it needed something. I fumbled my way through to what I actually needed at those times. I learned that if I made myself a smoothie, I wouldn't get high with food the same way I would with a chocolate bar, but I would scratch the itch, the urge would go away, and I'd be okay. I have what I need right now. I wasn't feeling tortured by the craving. Um, there are other ways that you can wake up a little bit earlier. Most people can teach themselves to become aware when their heart's beating a little bit faster, or they're getting goosebumps, or they're starting to perspire a little bit. Like all these signs of sympathetic nervous system activity, often those will appear before the binge fantasy actually appears.
Mm-hmm.
Then when you learn to wake up at those times, you can redirect your thoughts to something that you know would be authentically pleasurable that you might actually need. I recently gave up. I recently gave up caffeine of any form. I used to be drinking an awful lot of decaf. It's the last vestige of a diet-induced health problem that I have. I was mistaken in my knowledge about salt. I thought because my blood pressure was low that it was okay that I had as much salt as I wanted to all these years. But it turns out that your arteries, actually your veins and arteries, the walls on them, they actually respond to salt the same way that your muscles respond to lifting weights.
Mm-hmm.
So all these years I was making them harder and harder, and I didn't know. And then I had elevated blood pressure. So I had to give up all salt and all caffeine whatsoever, including decaffeinated coffee. And I had a real decaf habit. I would drive over to this little place called Racetrack. It's not a racetrack. It just happens to be the name of the gas station. And I really liked the coffee that they made. And often they would give it to me for free because I was there so often. And it was a break for me. It was just a really nice break from the rat race. And I realized that there was this whole fantasy that would start when I would think, oh, I'm going to go get my coffee now. I would be thinking about turning off the computer and walking downstairs, and then probably, talk to some of the nice people on the way out. And then I get in my car and I can listen to the news, and I didn't have to listen to any complaints or solve any business problems. And
So it was a nice
there's just this
escape.
whole, yeah. Now, here's the interesting thing. Most people will give themselves permission to go break their rules and take a break while they break their rules. But they won't give themselves permission to just take a break.
Mm.
And so I realized that I could kill that fantasy before it became uncomfortable, before it became something I had to resist. I could kill it by fantasizing about other things that would be pleasurable to me. So most immediately, that was making some herbal tea with a plant-based milk in it. That worked for me. I started thinking about that. Then there are also places I could drive to go get a plant-based tea with the milk in it if I wanted to. So thinking about what authentic pleasure I really needed. Sometimes I was actually hungry and I didn't really need the coffee. I was actually hungry. But there were other types of pleasure where, we're wired with these dopamine producing brains that are supposed to give us pleasure. We need a certain amount during the day. And I have a list of other things that I can do instead. Like it sounds trite, but if you really understand what's going on, it makes a big difference. So I have pictures of my niece and my nephew when they were little that I can pull out and look at. I've got a bunch of old movies like Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein and The Man with Two Brains, and some of my favorite things that I know I can count down for a laugh if I want to, that I can always go to. If I have a shorter time, I've got some old TV shows that I can grab up if I want, or music I can listen to, or I spent a lot of money and time moving myself to the beach. I live in a tiny little apartment, but it's right on the beach, so I can walk outside and take a couple of breaths by the water if I want. So there are all these things that I can do to calm that organismic distress, and that tends to prevent your brain from going out of rational mode and into the screw it, just do it. So that's a lot of what the new book is about.
Yeah, that relates a lot to the work I do. I call them routine swap outs. Like if you think of, the anatomy of a habit and the middle piece, which is that the routine is obviously to go and get the food and eat the food, right? That's the thing. And you're seeking the pleasure reward or the calming of the nervous system. And so I get people to put down a routine swap out list to still feed that same desire or organismic distress as you talk about it, um, in order to be able to still arrive at the reward of maybe dopamine or calming or
Yeah,
moving through it.
absolutely.
Yeah, but using a different vessel to get there.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah.
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 The other thing that I'm wondering too is when it comes to doing that, the way that I think about it, and maybe you think differently, but is that in many cases we're using food as an escape from that stressor or problem that's occurring, or it might be a calming. But let's just go with the idea of we're trying to escape something. Maybe it's an uncomfortable emotion, maybe it's a social interaction, whatever it is. With those sort of ideas of going about it in a different way to have the same reward, in my mind, that's still, even though we've made a healthier choice and it might be breath work, it might be meditation, it might be walking out onto the beach, it's still an escape mechanism. So the core problem hasn't been identified, whether it be that, sugar makes me feel loved, nurtured, supported, whatever it might be in that space. And so even though the breath work and stuff like that is working effectively to stop that practice of binge eating, it's still an escape from whatever boiled up within you, inside the vessel. And so, do you think, and maybe you do, maybe you don't, that there's escaping, but then you still also need to do the processing work?
Um, I think that's separate and apart from breaking the habit.
Okay.
I think it is an indication that there's some emotional work to be done. The danger in talking about that is that people start to think that they need to analyze themselves and do all this deep psychological work before they can stop overeating, and you can't actually intervene in the habit. Um, there are other pieces to the emotional eating puzzle that people don't consider. Like a lot of people will tell me that they can't get to bed at night because they feel too anxious unless they have a big plate of carbs, right? And I'll say, well, do you think that it's possible that that big plate of carbs could be making you anxious? What? There's a principle called operant conditioning. Remember, your brain is a food acquisition machine. It's always looking for ways to acquire calories and nutrition. And uh, there are, we know this from animal studies. There are animal studies on the correlates of anxiety. Anxiety is a very physical experience. Your blood pressure goes up a little bit, your galvanic skin response goes up a little bit, all those sympathetic activities go up. Well, there are studies where they measure, I remember one in particular, they measured a baboon's blood pressure. And whenever its blood pressure went up, group of baboons, they gave them a sugar reward. And don't you know that that group of baboons learned to have consistently higher blood pressure than the control group?
And then got
So
diabetes. No, I'm just joking.
maybe I don't know. Man, it was like one of them smoking in the corner. Hey man, it's horrible. I can't sit. I quit. It's not my back.
With a top hat on as well.
Yeah. But what did you do with all that exercise? What did you do? Um, so, so the point is that it's a two-way relationship. Like, yes, you can escape from overeating with the junk, but you can also reinforce the anxiety or the uncomfortable emotion with the junk too. You could prove like people will say, I'm eating to numb out, I'm eating to escape. And I will often joke with them, well, if your dentist were out of Novocaine, is it okay if they injected you with a bagel? Would that work just as well? But you're not eating the bagel just to numb out. Bagel is a concentration of calories that doesn't exist in nature. It's a concentration of a substance that was meant to be good, but it's overly concentrated, and your system is not prepared for that supersized stimulus. Another word for it is a drug.
Mm-hmm.
You're getting high with food. So I suggest that people who are caught in the emotional eating trap, that they tell themselves that, no, I'm not just eating for comfort, I'm also eating to get high with food. And then, yes, you can ask yourself, what am I escaping from? What would be some better ways process those feelings. And would it be easier if I didn't have such a large fire inside me? But probably. But the problem with that is it can take 5 or 10 years to really do that kind of work.
Yeah.
And I say you can stop overeating even if your mama dropped you on your head and her mama dropped her head. Um, you can build a fireplace around the fire rather than putting
Yeah, well, and
stuff.
I can actually totally relate to sort of what you're alluding to there, which is that you can get caught up in your own story for far too long, or you can apply stories to the story of the way you remember it, and then it grows. It kind of, that's the story grows into a way that totally facilitates and supports your new narrative of emotional eating or sugar addiction or whatever it might be, because I was, traumatized as a child or whatever it might be, and it can you can embed that story so deeply as an adult about the story that happened when you were younger that it just all becomes this giant piece of identity
Yeah,
that
just
I eat
becomes a
chocolate every
big
day.
narrative, and it's like if you ever went to Alcoholics Anonymous, they develop these drunkalos. They kind of get stronger. It's like a fish story over time, and it becomes a fiction that you tell yourself to keep yourself stuck. And thinking that you can control yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. It's yeah, I think the difference at the moment, and I use that term loosely, since social media has allowed personal development people on the internet, is that we've gone through this generation of people, and maybe it's my generation of millennials, where we went so deep into this personal development stuff that it was a drug in its own right. Like, oh, the world's all about me and my suffering and my trauma and poor me. And sure, don't get me wrong, I am so grateful that I was introduced to that world, because I have a plethora of healed wounds and
Me too. Me too.
communication skills on the other side that I may have never been exposed to ever. However, we're also now got this Instagram feed that's full of all these personal development gurus that are talking about our trauma and our trauma and our trauma and our trauma and our trauma.
See, I mean, I grew up in a family of 17
I do
psychotherapists.
remember you saying that.
Yeah, it used to drive me crazy though, because there'd be these people around all the time. My parents had their practice in the home, and so I used to talk to their patients all the time. They would actually talk to me before they went to talk to my parents, and they come out and tell me what they talked about. It was great.
Double
Um,
therapy.
but everybody's saying, "Well, I just really feel that, and I was able to say that, and my inner child is wounded because of this, Y, and Z." And I was like, "Shut up! Just tell me what's." It was a kind of a wussification of free will and responsibility for people who focus too much. And it sounds like an awful thing for a psychologist to say. I really am still a compassionate person. I went for a lot of that therapy myself, but I got really distracted by that in my journey to overcome overeating, and I suffered for maybe 20 years more than I had to, because I wasn't focusing on the practicalities. I was focusing on the emotional stuff.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
totally hear what you're saying, and I think a lot of people listening are likely in that circumstance of having been wanted. They've wanted to change for a very long time, and they've tried repeatedly, but there's a story that's stopping them, or there's a layer of the onion that they peel back, and they're like, "Oh, I'm way more broken than I even thought." you know.
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, now that everybody hates me, what else should we talk
No,
about?
you're fantastic. That's why we've got you here.
Okay.
Well, I guess where can everybody find your book? Tell us a little bit about
Oh,
that.
I made it available for free on my site. So if you go to freeturecravings.com, you click the big blue button, you can get a free copy of the Kindle or the Nook or the PDF.
Mhm.
The other formats have a traditional charge, but the Kindle, Nook, and PDF are free. And I'll also give you a set of food plan starter templates. So these are sets of rules that could accommodate any particular dietary philosophy. Like I said, I prefer people don't use the extremes, but I'll show you examples of people that did. And then I know some of this sounds a little bit abstract and obtuse when we talk about it in theory. So I recorded a whole bunch of full length coaching sessions. You'll also get that. It's all free. Click the
Amazing.
big blue button and sign up for the free word or bonuses. You'll wind up with a free copy of the book too. And if you're interested in all the other stuff like the coaching we have to offer, you'll be led to that if you.
Fantastic. Yeah, I'll put all of the links for everything down in the show notes below, so everybody can everybody can
Defeat
get
your
their
cravings.
Yeah.
Defeatyourcravings.com. Yep.
defeatyourcravings.com. So yeah, I'll put all the links down below. Scroll down, click the link, jump into Glenn's world, change your life. It'll be amazing. And for anybody that may have been like, oh, what's the pig story? Check out the book, but also check out episode 96 because Glenn goes deep into the pig inside him story, which is a very unique and interesting strategy for managing those cravings.
They got a pig inside me, yeah.
The only way that I relate to that is that I love bacon.
People, they don't really always know my name, but they recognize me sometimes. And they'll point at me at a bookstore and they'll go, "You're the pig guy. You're the pig guy." It's a lovely thing to have occur in a first date, I gotta tell you.
Because you've sold, how many copies have you sold now?
There's over 1 million copies in distribution.
Amazing.
I write for Psychology Today. We had over 1 million readers there also. This really took off.
Yeah.
But I recommend people read the later book rather than the earlier books because this is really updated with the scourges to your response. And there's an awful lot we didn't talk about with regards to the science of cravings.
Mm-hmm.
That's really helpful. How are they formed? How do you extinguish them? And it really helps you take control. So
I
more highly recommend it
for the next episode.
Cravings and the old books.
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
I'm making a note for us to do that on the next episode.
Okay.
Amazing.
Okay.
So before we finish up for this episode, what is one piece of health information that you wish more people knew about?
Maybe a little blurb about the science of cravings. Cravings are normal. They're actually a survival advantage. If we didn't have cravings 100,000 years ago, we would have starved and died. They're what get you motivated to go figure out how to find food and then go get it and eat it. Cravings are almost always attached to a food stimulus. So it could be a package, a smell, a place, a time, a memory. There's usually a stimulus that indicates the availability of food. Like in primitive times, it was probably following a monkey to a banana tree. Mm-hmm. Like it was a quicker way to go find bananas if you could find the monkey and follow the monkey to the banana tree. Cravings, the brain turns on cravings when the food stimulus reliably leads to a food reward, and it turns them off when it doesn't. The worst thing that you can do when you're trying to defeat your cravings is randomly reinforce it. So if you just try really hard for a while and then you can't take it anymore and you just go do it for whatever unpredictable reason, you're triggering a response in the brain, which is meant to hold on to learning when a food signal becomes less reliable. So if you follow a chimp to a banana tree and it's like 100% reliable in the beginning, eventually the trees in the area are going to start to run out of bananas. So maybe you're only going to find a banana tree with bananas on it 70% of the time. Well, it turns out that it's still more valuable in primitive times to have a 70% reliable signal than to go have to find another one because food was pretty scarce. And to be able to reach it without dealing with a competitor, the brain does not want to give up on a food signal that becomes less reliable or intermittently reliable. So it's going to double down on its dopamine production. It's going to double down on motivating you to keep after that craving if it just kind of randomly stops producing the reward. So what you want to do is you want to avoid what they call variable ratio reinforcement. Variable ratio reinforcement means it's like what happens on a slot machine. You don't know when it's going to pay off. And that's why you get these people stuck at the machines in Atlantic City, because if it was only going to pay off on Saturdays at 10 a.m., there'd be a big crowd at Saturdays at 10 a.m., and then there'd be nobody there all week long.
I'd be there at 10 a.m.
So you can extinguish your cravings by saying, I'm only going to have chocolate on Saturday morning after my workout, because your brain is capable of learning that complex set of stimuli have to be present. And otherwise, the slot machine is not going to pay off. What most people do is they try for a while until they just can't take it anymore, and then they randomly reinforce it. You're actually getting your brain to double down on the craving when you do that. So there's something called an extinction burst. When the reward becomes unavailable, there's a little honeymoon period. So let's say you decide you're going to give up chocolate. reward, the reward becomes unavailable. There's a little period where the cravings go down for a bit, and then boom, there's that intermittent reward, and there's that intermittent temper tantrum looking. The brain throws a bit of a temper tantrum looking to see if maybe the reward has become intermittently available and it's going to motivate you. If you push through that, if you don't say, well, this is not working, I can't take it, and you keep going, you do all the things to soothe yourself that we talked about, then it will start dropping down. And eventually you're going to get to the point that the cravings are labeled dormant. Cravings don't actually get erased because the brain doesn't want to give up its learning, but the brain also wants to be very efficient and it doesn't want to waste energy in craving something you're never going to do. So it will label that craving dormant until such time as you reactivate it. So don't break your rules once you got them set, and then you'll be free. You definitely will be free.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, I like that message about random reinforcement. That's the worst thing you can do.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, I mean, if you don't want to give it up, then say you're going to have it on Mondays and Fridays at 5 a.m. or, after your workout or something like that. But
so that would be the opposite, right? Which is structured reinforcement.
Yeah, it's predictable reinforcement.
Yeah, I understand. Fantastic. Well, I definitely think we should pull that apart on the next episode for sure.
I think in the literature it's called fixed ratio.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Awesome. Well, thanks for being here. Appreciate your time and having this conversation, and I'm looking forward to getting it out to the people. So, we'll get offline and organize another time for the next one. But thank you for being here.
I'd love to, yeah. Thanks, Matty.
So welcome. We'll catch you really soon.
Okay, I'll catch you soon.
Bye.
Bye.